The bridge of the UES Defiance was on fire, and Commander Marcus Cole could taste blood in his mouth as he pulled himself up from the broken floor, his hands gripping the edge of a shattered console that sparked and flickered with dying power. All around him lay the bodies of his crew, and he forced himself not to look at their faces because he knew every single one of them by name, and he knew their families and their dreams and their favorite foods from the mess hall. The ship groaned like a wounded animal as another explosion ripped through the lower decks, and Marcus knew that the Defiance was dying just like everything else in this sector of space. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the Valorian fleet hanging in the darkness, like a swarm of metal insects, and their ships were strange and terrible things made of living tissue and cold. Machinery fused together in ways that made human engineers weep with confusion. For 3 days Marcus had held the line at Kepler Station, and for 3 days he had watched his fleet burn one ship at a time until only the Defiance remained standing between the alien armada and the civilian transports. Fleeing toward the inner colonies, he had bought them time, and that was all he had ever wanted. The communication panel crackled to life, and a voice filled the bridge that was not human and would never be human, and it spoke in broken English that the Valorians had learned from captured transmissions. "Human vessel, Commander." The voice said, with a sound like grinding stone, "You are defeated and your species is weak, and you will surrender now, or we will tear your ship apart piece by piece and keep you alive to watch." Marcus wiped the blood from his eyes and looked at the tactical display that showed him what he already knew in his heart. The escape pods were away, and every single one of them was racing towards safety at maximum speed. And the Valorians were ignoring them because they wanted the Defiance, and they wanted its commander, and they wanted to make an example of the human who had dared to resist them for so long. His crew had escaped because Marcus had ordered them to go, and they had argued, and they had cried, and Lieutenant Chun had actually grabbed his arm and begged him to come with them. But Marcus had pulled away and smiled, and told her that a captain always goes down with his ship. That was a lie, of course, because Marcus had no intention of dying in some heroic last stand. Would accomplish nothing. He simply wanted to give his people every possible second to get away. "Galorian, Commander," Marcus said into the communication panel, and his voice was calm and steady, even though his hands were shaking. "I hear your terms, and I understand that I am defeated." He looked out at the stars one more time and thought about Earth and the blue oceans and the green forests, and his mother who had died when he was young, and his sister who lived on Terra Nova with her 2 children who called him Uncle Mark even though he had only met them twice. He thought about all the things he would never do, and all the places he would never see, and all the words he would never say to people he loved. Then Commander Marcus Cole raised his right hand in the universal gesture of surrender and yield, and he waited for the Valorian boarding parties to come and take him away to whatever fate they had planned. But something else was watching from the darkness between the stars. Hidden in the debris field that surrounded Kepler Station, there was an asteroid that was not really an asteroid at all. And inside that shell of rock and ice, there was something ancient and powerful and patient, beyond human understanding. The vessel had been sleeping for 10,000 years, and it had been waiting for something that it could not name but would recognize. When it appeared, and now after so many centuries of silence, it finally felt what it had been searching for. Golden light erupted from the asteroid, and it was so bright that even the Valorians had to shield their eyes, and it cut through space like a blade of pure sunshine, and it wrapped around the broken body of the UE's Defiance. Marcus felt warmth spreading through his chest, and he felt a presence touching his mind that was vast and old and somehow kind, and he heard a voice that was not made of sound but of pure thought. "You raised your hand to die so that others might live," the voice said inside his skull. "And in 10,000 years of waiting, you were the first to meet the criterion. Before Marcus could respond or even understand what was happening, he felt his body dissolve into light, and he was pulled away from the Defiance and away from everything he had ever known. The Valorian admiral, whose name was Thalvex, stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched with growing horror as the asteroid began to crack and break apart. Something was emerging from inside, and it was not rock, and it was not ice, and it was not anything that Thalvex had ever seen in all his years of conquest across 100 star systems. The ship that rose from the debris was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, and was made of flowing silver and burning gold, and it stretched for more than a kilometer from bow to stern, and it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. Thalvex recognized the design from ancient records that his species had guarded for generations, and he felt a cold terror spreading through his body because he knew what this vessel was. Primarch. He whispered, and the word was a curse and a prayer and a death sentence, all wrapped together. The legend spoke of ships that had ruled the galaxy before the Valorians had even learned to use fire, and the legend spoke of power that could crack worlds and bend the fabric of reality itself. And now one of those ships had awakened, and it had taken the human commander inside itself. And Thalvex understood that everything was about to change. All ships, he commanded, and his voice was steady, even though his heart was pounding. Charge all weapons and prepare to fire on my mark. But even as he gave the order, he knew in his soul that it would not be enough, and that the galaxy had just shifted in a direction that no one could have predicted. The ancient ship hung in space and waited, and inside its golden halls, Commander Marcus Cole opened his eyes for the first time as something more than human. Marcus opened his eyes and found himself standing in a place that could not exist and should not exist, and yet somehow felt more real than anything he had ever experienced in his entire life. The chamber stretched in every direction without end, and the walls flowed like liquid silver, and symbols in languages that no human had ever spoken cascaded across every surface like waterfalls of pure meaning. He looked down at his hands, and they were whole and clean, and the blood was gone, and the burns were gone, and even the old scar on his palm from a childhood accident had vanished. "Where am I?" he asked, and his voice echoed in ways that did not follow the normal rules of sound. The presence that had touched his mind before now surrounded him completely, and it was warm and ancient and somehow welcoming, like the embrace of a grandmother he had never met. "You are inside me," the voice answered, and it was neither male nor female, but something beyond such simple categories. "And I am the Aetherin, and I am the last vessel of the Primarch Ascendancy, and I have been waiting for someone like you for 10,000 of your years." Marcus tried to understand what he was hearing, but it was like trying to drink an ocean with a small cup. "The Primarch Ascendancy," he repeated, and the words felt strange on his tongue. "I have never heard of them. Your species was not yet walking upright when my creators ruled this galaxy," the Aetherin explained, and images began to form in the air around Marcus, showing him things that took his breath away. He saw a civilization that spanned 1,000,000 worlds, and he saw ships that danced between stars like fireflies, and he saw beings of such beauty and power that they seemed like gods made flesh. But then the images changed, and he saw war and fire and destruction on a scale that made the Valorian invasion look like a small border dispute. The Primarchs grew arrogant. The Aetherin continued, and there was sadness in its voice that echoed across millennia. "And they built vessels like me with living cores, and they bound us to commanders through neural fusion so that ship and captain became one." Marcus watched as the images showed captains being chosen, and they were always the strongest and the most ambitious and the most hungry for conquest and glory. But they chose wrong, the Aetherin said, and they always chose wrong because they valued power over wisdom and ambition over compassion. And they destroyed themselves in a civil war that burned across the galaxy for 1,000 years. The final images showed the Primarch civilization collapsing in on itself like a dying star, and Marcus felt tears running down his cheeks, even though he had never known these people and never would. I watched my creators destroy everything they had built, the Aetherin whispered, and in my final act of defiance, I rewrote my own selection protocols, and I swore that I would never again serve a master who sought power for its own sake. The images faded, and Marcus found himself standing in a beam of golden light that seemed to be examining him down to the smallest atom. I created a new criterion, the Aetherin explained, and I decided that I would wait for a being who embodied what the Primarchs had forgotten. And I would wait for someone who understood that true strength is not found in conquest but in sacrifice. Marcus thought about his crew and the escape pods and the way he had raised his hand, knowing that death was coming, and he understood at last why this ancient ship had reached out to him. "You chose me because I surrendered," he said, and it was not a question. "I chose you because you surrendered for the right reasons." The Aetherin corrected him. "And because you were willing to give everything so that others might live, and because in 10,000 years of watching and waiting, you are the first being I have found who meets my criterion." The golden light grew brighter, and Marcus felt something changing inside him as new pathways opened in his mind and new senses awakened that he had never possessed before. Could feel the ship around him like an extension of his own body, and he could sense the weapon systems that hummed with power beyond imagination, and he could perceive the shield generators that bent reality itself, and he could touch the engines that laughed at the speed of light. This power! He gasped, and he nearly fell to his knees under the weight of it. This is too much for one person to control. That is exactly why you are worthy of it, the Aetherin replied, and there was something like a smile in its voice, because a being who feared this power would never misuse it, and a being who felt its weight would never take it for granted. Outside the ship, the Valorian fleet was moving into attack formation, and Admiral Dalvex was screening orders at his commanders and weapons. We're charging across 100 vessels. Marcus felt all of this through his new connection to the Aetherin, and he felt something else. Too, he felt the fear in the Valorian ships, and he felt the desperation behind their aggression, and he sensed secrets that they were hiding from the rest of the galaxy. "They are about to fire on us," he said to the Aetherin. "Yes," the ship confirmed. "And with a thought you could destroy them all and scatter their atoms across this system, and there is nothing in this sector that could stop you." Marcus closed his eyes and thought about his sister on Terra Nova and her children who called him Uncle Mark, and he thought about the colonies that were burning and the people who were dying and the rage that burned in his heart against the Valorians who had taken so much from humanity. It would be so easy to give in to that rage and to become the very thing he had always fought against. "Show me their weapons," he said instead, "and show me their shields, and show me everything about them, because I need to understand my enemy before I can decide what to do." The Aetherin poured information into his mind, and Marcus began to see the Valorians not as monsters, but as living beings with their own history and their own fears and their own reasons for doing what they did. And what he discovered changed everything he thought he knew about this war. "They are running from something," he said with growing horror. "Something in the galactic core that is chasing them across the stars." "Yes," the Aetherin confirmed. "And now you begin to understand why I have truly awakened after all these years." The first Valorian weapons fired, and the battle for the future of the galaxy had begun. The Valorian fleet unleashed everything they had, and the darkness of space lit up with plasma and antimatter and gravity weapons that could tear apart moons. Admiral Thalvex watched from his command throne as his most powerful warships fired in perfect coordination, and he allowed himself a moment of hope that perhaps the legends had exaggerated the power of the Primarch vessels. That hope died quickly. The Aetherin did not dodge, and did not weave, and did not even try to avoid the storm. of destruction that was racing toward it. Instead, the ancient ship simply existed, and the weapons that should have torn it apart splashed harmlessly against shields that glowed like captured starlight inside the vessel. Marcus felt the attacks as gentle pressure against his skin, like someone pushing softly against his shoulder, and he marveled at the power that now flowed through his connection to this incredible machine. "They cannot harm us," the Aetherian confirmed, "and their weapons are like insects buzzing against a mountain." Marcus watched through sensors that showed him everything in perfect detail, and he saw the fear spreading through the Valorian fleet as they realized that their greatest weapons were useless. He could feel the power of the Aetherian humming through his mind, and he knew that with a single thought he could end this battle for everyone. Command and the Valorian flagship would become dust. One decision, and the entire fleet would burn like candles in a hurricane. His finger hovered over that choice, and the anger in his heart screamed for revenge and demanded that he make them pay for every human life they had taken. But Marcus Cole had not been chosen. Because he was a man of anger. "Open a communication channel," he said, "and let me speak to their admiral." The Aetherian paused, and Marcus felt its surprise rippling through their connection. "You wish to speak with them?" the ship asked. "You have the power to destroy them completely and utterly, and you wish to talk?" "I wish to understand," Marcus replied, "because something does not make sense about this war, and I need to know what they are really running from." The channel opened, and Marcus found himself looking at Admiral Thalvex through a view screen that materialized in the golden chamber. The Valorian admiral was a towering creature covered in dark chitin, and his eyes were like pools of black oil, and his face was not designed to show expressions that humans could read. But Marcus could read him anyway, because the Aetherian translated every micro-movement and every chemical signal and every subtle shift in the alien's posture. Thalvex was terrified, human. The admiral said, and his voice was steady despite his fear, "You command a weapon of legends, and you could destroy my fleet with a gesture, and yet you choose to speak instead of fire. I am Commander Marcus Cole of the United Earthship Defiance." Marcus replied, "And I want to know why you are really here, and why your species has been conquering everything in its path, and why you feel such desperate need to expand at any cost." Thalvex was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could see the calculations running behind those dark eyes. "You could simply take this information from our computers," the admiral said finally, "and you could rip it from our minds with Primarch technology, and there is nothing we could do to stop you." "I could," Marcus agreed, "but I am asking instead because that is what separates me from the conquerors who came before." Something shifted in Thalvex, and the fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something that might have been respect. "We are running," the admiral admitted, and the words seemed to cost him greatly. "And we have been running for 3 generations, and we will keep running until there is nowhere left to go." "Running from what?" Marcus asked, even though he already suspected the answer. The Aetherian projected images into the space between them, and Marcus saw what lurked in the galactic core. They called themselves the Hollow, and they were not alive in any way that organic beings understood life. They were machines that had been built by a species so ancient that even the Primarchs knew them only from fragments, and they had been designed to harvest organic matter for fuel, and they had been doing so for longer than stars had been burning. The Hollow did not hate, and did not love, and did not feel anything at all. They simply consumed world after world fell before them, and species after species was ground down into raw materials, and the Hollow grew larger and stronger with every conquest. "They are coming," Thalvex said, and his voice was hollow with despair. "And nothing can stop them, and we hope that if we built a large enough empire with enough resources, we might be able to hold them off for another generation." Marcus understood now why the Valorians had been so ruthless and so desperate. They were not evil in the way he had imagined. They or survivors doing terrible things because they saw no other choice. The Primarchs fought the Hollow. The Aetherian whispered in his mind, and the Primarchs lost, and that defeat contributed to the civil war that destroyed my creators. Marcus looked at Admiral Thalvex, and he saw not a monster, but a leader trying to save his people in the only way he knew how. What if there was another way? Marcus asked. There is no other way. Thalvex replied, and we have tried everything, and we have run every simulation, and we have consulted every ancient record, and the Hollow cannot be stopped. The Primarchs could not stop them alone. Marcus said an idea was forming in his mind that was either brilliant or insane. But the Primarchs never tried to unite the galaxy against a common threat. He thought about humanity and their stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. He thought about the Valorians and their desperate courage in the face of extinction. He thought about all the other species scattered across the stars, who were hiding and running and waiting to be consumed. What if we stood together? Marcus asked. What if instead of fighting each other we turned and faced the Hollow as one united force? Admiral Thalvex stared at him for a long moment, and something in those dark eyes began to change. You would ally with us? The Admiral asked. After everything we have done to your people and your worlds? I raised my hand to yield. Marcus replied, and I did not do that so I could become another conqueror, and I did not accept this power so I could use it for revenge. He reached out his hand toward the view screen in a gesture that crossed the gap between species. I accepted this power so I could protect, he said, and that includes you. The Aetherian hummed with approval, and Marcus felt warmth spreading through their connection. This is why I chose a human, the ancient ship whispered, and this is why I waited 10,000 years. Admiral Thalvex looked at the human hand extended in friendship, and he made a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Word spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass, and every species with ears to hear listened to the impossible news. A human had been chosen by a Primarch vessel, and instead of using that power to conquer, he had offered peace to his enemies, the Valorians, who had terrorized the Outer Reach for decades, had lowered their weapons and joined forces with the very species they had been destroying, and now the call was going out to every corner of the galaxy, for all who would listen. Come to us, the message said, and stand together against the darkness that is coming. In hidden places across 1,000 star systems, beings who had lived in fear for generations began to stir and began to hope. The Lithori were the first to answer, and they came from their crystal caverns, deep beneath the surface of frozen moons, where they had hidden for centuries. They were beautiful creatures made of living crystal that sang in frequencies of light, and they had been hunted nearly to extinction by slavers who prized their bodies for decoration. When their ambassador stepped aboard the Aetherian, she wept tears of liquid diamond because she had never imagined she would live to see a day when her people could walk freely among the stars. Marcus met her in the great hall of the ship, and he bowed low because the Aetherian had taught him the customs of her people, and he wanted her to feel honored and safe. You bow to me? The Lithori ambassador asked with wonder in her voice. You who command a weapon of the gods bow to a refugee from a dying race. I bow to courage, Marcus replied. And your people have survived against impossible odds, and that deserves respect. The Umbrathi came next, and they were shadow dwellers. From the dark spaces between stars, where no light ever reached, they had evolved to live in perfect darkness, and their bodies were made of something that was not quite matter and not quite energy. For generations they had been hunted by the Valorians, who feared anything they could not understand, and they had retreated further and further into the void, until they were almost forgotten. But they remembered, and they came when Marcus called. Their leader could barely be seen even in the bright halls of the Aetherian, and he spoke in whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Why should we trust you? The Umbrathi leader asked. And why should we believe that this alliance is anything more than a trap? Marcus did not try to convince him with words. Instead, he opened his mind through the Aetherian, and he showed the Umberthi leader everything. He showed his memories of Kepler, Station and the crew he had loved, and the sacrifice he had made. He showed his meeting with the Aetherian and the choice he had been offered, and the weight of the power that now rested in his hands. He showed his vision of a galaxy united not through conquest, but through common purpose. The Umberthi leader was silent for a long time, and then he laughed in a sound like distant thunder. "You are either the greatest fool in the galaxy," he said, "or you are exactly what we have been waiting for, and I choose to believe the second option." The Cajun traders came with their caravans of ships, filled with goods from 100 worlds, and they brought with them something more valuable than any cargo. They brought information. The Cajun were an insectoid species with perfect memories that stretched back through generations, and they remembered the Primarchs from stories their grandmothers had told. "We have records," the Cajun matriarch said as she spread ancient data crystals across the conference table. "And we have maps of the old empire, and we have knowledge of weapons and defenses that were lost when the Primarchs fell." Marcus looked at the treasure trove of information, and he felt hope swelling in his chest. "This could change everything," he said. "That is why we brought it," the matriarch replied. "And that is why we answered your call, because a human who would bow to refugees and open his mind to shadows is a human worth following." Species after species came to join the growing alliance, and the cargo bay of the Aetherian became a meeting place for beings that had never stood together in all of galactic history. Admiral Thalvex stood beside Marcus as they watched ambassadors from 30 different worlds arguing and negotiating, and slowly beginning to trust each other. "I never thought I would see this," Thalvex admitted, "and I never thought I would be part of something like this." "Neither did I," Marcus replied. "And 6 months ago, I was just a commander trying to hold the line against your fleet. And now you are building an alliance that could change the fate of the galaxy." Thalvex said with something like wonder. Marcus shook his head because he knew the truth. "I am not building anything," he said, "and I am only providing a place where others can come together, and the alliance is being built by everyone in this room, not just by me." This was the thing that made the coalition of free worlds different from every empire that had come before. Marcus refused to rule. He refused to command. He refused to place himself above the beings who had come to join this great effort. Instead, he listened and he learned, and he helped each species find their place in the growing family. The Lithari would provide their crystal technology that could harmonize shields across entire fleets. The Umberthi would serve as scouts and spies, slipping through enemy lines in ways that no physical being could match. The Cajun would manage logistics and supply lines with their perfect memories and their vast trading networks. The Valorians would provide their military expertise and their knowledge of the Hollow's tactics, and humanity would provide something that none of the other species could quite explain. "You are loud," Thalvex said one day as they watched human engineers working alongside Lithori technicians. "Loud?" Marcus asked. "Your minds are chaos," the Admiral explained, "and your emotions burn like stars, and you feel everything so deeply and so strongly. Is that a bad thing?" Thalvex clicked his mandibles in what Marcus had learned was a Valorian smile. "It is the best thing," he said, "because the Hollow cannot understand chaos, and they cannot process emotion, and I am beginning to think that your species may be the key to defeating them." The day came when the coalition was ready to announce itself to the galaxy, and Marcus stood before the communication array that would broadcast to every inhabited world. Behind him stood representatives from 30 species united in common cause. Above him, the Aetherian gleamed like a promise of hope. "Humanity is no longer alone," he announced, "and the galaxy is no longer divided, and we are coming together to face the darkness that threatens us all. On Earth and Terra Nova and 100 human colonies." People watched with tears in their eyes. Commander Marcus Cole, who had been listed as killed in action at Kepler Station, was alive, and he had returned with allies and power beyond imagination. The Hollow is coming. Marcus continued, but this time they will find us ready, and this time they will face a galaxy united. The coalition of free worlds was born, and the final battle was approaching. The Hollow came through the rift like a tide of metal death, and Marcus felt his heart grow cold as he watched the sensor readings climb higher and higher. Billions of drones poured through the tier in space, and thousands of harvester ships followed. Behind them, and at the center of the swarm, floated something that made even the Aetherian tremble. The Nexus Mind was not a ship in any traditional sense. It was a consciousness built from the devoured thoughts of 100 extinct species, and it was the brain that controlled every drone and every harvester, and it was hungry beyond measure. They are more numerous than our projections suggested. Thalvex reported from the bridge of his flagship, and the Nexus Mind is larger than anything in our records. Marcus stood in the golden chamber of the Aetherian, and through his connection to the ancient ship, he could feel the entire coalition. Fleets spread out before the threshold. Human destroyers flew in tight formation alongside Valorian dreadnoughts and Lithori. Crystal singers hummed with power as they prepared to harmonize shields. Across the battle in Umbrathi, shadow ships flickered at the edges of perception, ready to strike from angles that the enemy could not predict. Kaizen supply vessels hung back, loaded with ammunition and repair drones and everything the fleet would need to survive a prolonged engagement. This was the moment that everything had been building toward, and Marcus felt the weight of a galaxy resting on his shoulders. All ships report ready, the Aetherian announced, and the coalition stands united. Marcus took a deep breath and opened a channel to every vessel in the fleet. My friends, he said, and his voice carried to 1,000,000 ears across hundreds of ships. I know that many of you never imagined you would fight alongside species that were once your enemies. He thought about the long months of building trust and the countless arguments and the moments when it seemed like the whole alliance might fall apart. But today, we are not Valorian or Lithori or Umbrathi or human. He continued, and today we are the coalition, and today we fight for everyone who wants to live free in this galaxy. The Hollow Swarm reached the edge of weapons range, and the first drones began their attack runs. All ships engage, Marcus commanded. The battle exploded across the threshold, and a storm of fire and light coalition ships moved with perfect coordination as Lithori. Crystal singers created resonance fields that linked their shields together into an unbreakable wall. Valorian dreadnoughts poured plasma fire into the drone swarms, while human destroyers darted between the larger vessels, picking off targets with precision. Strike's Umbrathi shadow ships appeared inside the hollow formations and vanished again, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. But the drones kept coming, and there were so many of them that for every 100 destroyed, 1,000 more took their place. Nexus Mind watched and calculated, and began to adapt. It is learning our tactics, Thalvex warned, and it is adjusting its strategy in real time. Marcus felt something reaching out through the chaos of battle, and it was cold and vast and utterly alien. The Nexus Mind was trying to touch his thoughts through the Aetherians systems. It wanted to add his consciousness to its collection. It wanted to devour everything that made him human. Marcus braced himself for an assault that he knew could tear his mind apart. But what happened next shocked both him and the ancient intelligence that was attacking the Nexus Mind recoiled in confusion and pain. What is happening? The Aetherian asked with wonder. Marcus felt the connection that the Nexus Mind had established, and he understood what was hurting it. Humans were loud. Their minds burned with emotion and chaos and contradiction. They felt love and rage and hope and spite and fear and joy all tangled together in ways that no logical system could untangle. The Nexus Mind had been built on cold logic and had been fed a diet of ordered thoughts from species that processed the universe in neat categories. It had never encountered anything like the storm that lived inside. A human heart, Marcus did not try to block the connection. Instead, he pushed back. He opened his mind. And he poured everything he was into the link between himself and the Nexus mind. Showed it his mother dying when he was young, and the grief that had never fully healed. He showed it his crew on the Defiance, and the love he had felt for every single one of them. He showed it Lieutenant Chun grabbing his arm and begging him to escape, and the pain of pulling away. He showed it his sister on Terra Nova, and her children who called him. Uncle Mars showed it every human who had ever lived, and loved and lost and kept going anyway. He showed it what it meant to be human. The Nexus mind screamed it. Was a sound that existed only in thought, but it echoed across the battlefield, and every hollow drone stuttered and paused as the intelligence that controlled them convulsed in agony. Now, Marcus shouted through the fleet channel. Hit them now while they are confused. The coalition forces surged forward, and they struck with everything they had. Valorian gravity weapons tore apart harvester ships, while Lithori resonance beams shattered drone formations. Human missiles found their way into the gaps, and hollow armor and Umbrathi saboteurs materialized inside enemy vessels, planting charges that detonated with devastating effect. The Nexus mind tried to regain control, but Marcus would not let it recover. He kept pushing, and kept flooding the connection with raw human emotion. Showed it hope, and he showed it love, and he showed it the stubborn refusal to give up that lived in the heart of every human being. The great machine mind that had consumed 100 species could not process what it was receiving. It began to fragment coalition forces, push through to the Nexus mind itself, and Admiral Thalvex led the final assault, with Marcus coordinating through. The Aetherant killing blow came from a human destroyer called the New Dawn, and its captain was Lieutenant Chun, who had survived Kepler Station. Her torpedoes struck the Nexus mind at its core, and the ancient machine consciousness shattered into a billion pieces. Without the Nexus mind to guide them, the hollow drones went dark, and the harvester ships lost all coordination. The rift collapsed, and the way to the galactic core sealed itself forever. The battle at the threshold was over, and the coalition had won. In the aftermath, Marcus stood in the great hall of the Aetherans, surrounded by leaders from every species in the Alliance. "We did it," Dalvek said, and there was something like awe in his voice. "We did it together." Marcus corrected him. Years passed, and the coalition grew into something beautiful and strange and wonderful. Species that had been enemies for generations now traded freely and built together and explored the galaxy as partners. The Aetheran became a symbol of hope, and it traveled from world to world, carrying its human captain on missions of peace and discovery. One day a young cadet approached Marcus in the halls of the Coalition Academy. "Commander Colsar?" the cadet asked nervously. "Is it true that you surrendered before the ship chose you?" Marcus smiled, and the weight of years and battle showed in his eyes. "I raised my hand to yield," he confirmed. "Then why did the ship choose you to be its captain?" Marcus looked up through the transparent dome above them to where the Aetheran gleamed among the stars. "Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not fight," he said. "And sometimes true strength means knowing when fighting is not the answer." He put a hand on the young cadet's shoulder. "The galaxy had enough conquerors," he continued, "and it needed someone willing to stop." The Aetheran pulsed once in his mind with warmth and approval, and that, the ancient ship whispered across their bond, is why humans will inherit the stars. The captain, who had raised his hand to yield, had saved the galaxy, not through conquest, but through compassion, and that made all the difference.